Today on Small Project Central, I'm going to show you how I made this. Let's go.
Well, this build started in my driveway because I literally couldn't move inside my garage. And I certainly couldn't break down any plywood sheets in there, so I had to set up in my driveway. My first step was to build some quick saw horses so I wouldn't have to make any cuts down on the ground. Next, I broke out the track saw that my kids bought me for Christmas. It came with one rail, so I ordered a second rail and the connectors so I could rip the full 8-foot length out of a sheet of plywood. Man, were they expensive, but at the end of the day, I can tell you it was worth every penny. So I started measuring out my cuts for my base cabinet parts and made my first cut. I can't tell you how satisfying it was to make that cut and not having to push an entire sheet of plywood through a table saw. I continued to cut out all my cabinet sides, bottoms, and stringers, making sure I was square to my reference edge. Perfect. After cutting all the stringers, I immediately thought about my next investment in either a cross-cut jig for the track rail or even going crazy and getting an MFT table. It really slowed down the whole process, having to measure every cut 2 and 3 times, making sure I was square. Next, I started the process of edge banding each of the front edges of my base cabinet parts. I used a pre-glued birch edge band which came in a 200-foot roll. This is an iron-on edge band, so I bought a cheap $10 iron off of Amazon, and it pretty much got the job done. After ironing on the edge band, I hit it with a J-roller to make sure I had good adhesion. Since I didn't have one of those trimming jigs for the edge band, I thought just use a utility knife. That should work just fine. Well, not so much. It took a really long time, and I wound up cutting into the surface veneer several times. To top it off, I was using a dull file, which slowed things down even more. Lesson learned, use the right tool and your odds of success go up exponentially. Once I completed all the edge banding, I started the cabinet assembly. I wanted to see what all the hype was about with pocket holes, so I bought a jig. It definitely sped up the assembly process, but I wasn't very impressed with the bit that came with the kit. It left pretty jagged holes just begging to give me a splinter. I used clamps to hold everything in place while I inserted the pocket hole screws. I also added a few screws to connect the stringers for additional strength. For this project, I was using plywood that was pre-finished on one side. I was using glue in the cabinet assembly, but quickly realized that the glue wasn't sticking to that pre-finished surface. Lesson learned, only glue unfinished surfaces together. Once I had all the base cabinets assembled, it was time to move things around to get the toe kick placed and leveled up. As you can see, I'm working in a very small one-car garage and space is at a premium. Okay, so I know it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but the previous owner had left a bunch of tiles around the house. I'm not sure where they went, but I used one to seal up one of these vents on the side,
because the old garage doors didn't have vents at the bottom and required side ventilation, where our hurricane door has vent all the way across, and I've got one on the other side of the garage, so I feel comfortable. And it's not the prettiest shim job in the world, but I thought it would be better to put tile down directly to the concrete floor as opposed to the plywood base, because that way I don't have to worry about water wicking up into the plywood. And so here we go, getting ready. I got everything leveled up. It's always easier to put the base down first, then mount your cabinets on top. So let's get some cabinets installed.
I placed the cabinets on the toe kick, clamped them, and then screwed them together, making sure my screws would not interfere with any of the hardware I would be installing. Next up was to cut for my drawer bottoms. I decided to go with 1/2 inch plywood and 75-pound soft close drawer slides. I knew I'd be loading up the drawers with some pretty heavy tools, so I wanted to make sure the drawers were sturdy and would last over a time. And yes, I bit the bullet and bought a dust extractor. I know I'll eventually be making cuts inside the garage and wanted the best mobile dust collection. So far, I'm really impressed. Okay, so I got all my drawer bottoms cut. Now, that was the easy part because it was 3 long rips and then cross cutting. So now I'm looking at the drawer sides, back, and sub front. And I did 2 different ones. I did the opticutter.com, and then I did cutlistoptimizer.com. The cool part about the OptiCutter is you can actually put in what grain direction that you want, and it'll calculate on that. So that's what I did with this one. The Cut List Optimizer does not give you that option. As you can see, the grain, because the grain in the sheet is going this way, but the way it optimized it was cross grain, which that's fine for drawer sides. I'm just looking at what is my off-fall or my leftovers here that I can use for my upper cabinets when I go to build those. So right now we're just doing the base cabinets and the drawers. So not sure which one I'm going to go with. They both look pretty good, but honestly, I think I'm going to go with this one with the long rip, and this should be good for my uppers. Now I got all my drawer sides cut. I'm gonna do something that probably isn't necessary, but I think I'll like it when I'm opening and closing the drawers. Is I'm gonna go ahead and take the time to put some edge banding on top of the drawer sides so that it looks just finished and complete. Again, unnecessary step, but I like the idea, so I'm gonna go ahead and go for it. Okay, for this round of edge banding, I decided to use my trim router to finish off the edges. Well, this worked well for about the first 3 passes, and then the router bit started to gum up with the edge banding adhesive. But was definitely better than using the utility knife and much faster. I also invested in some new files, which made the process go faster.
Glad to be back.
I continued the pocket hole theme on this project using pocket holes to join my drawer sides. Again, this really sped up the assembly process. I didn't have an adapter for the dust collection port on the pocket hole jig, so I just placed the shop vac hose over the small port, and it worked really well, capturing most of the dust. For the drawer sides, I put the pre-finished side facing out. This allowed me to get a good glue bond between the drawer sides. Again, I used clamps to hold the sides together while I drove the screws in. This kept the side from moving at all. After watching all the YouTubers commenting on how the pieces tend to shift unless you have it clamped, I knew this was a must if I wanted to get a square drawer box. For the drawer bottoms, I used glue and shot in some 18 gauge brad nails to hold the bottom in place. I then drove some screws. I probably went a little overboard with the screws, but I wanted to make sure I had a good bond, especially on the taller drawers that would hold my larger tools. To install the drawer slide, starting with the top slide, I used a scrap piece of plywood to locate the slide position. I would then cut the scrap piece down to the next position. This ensured that each of my slides were in the same position in the cabinet. Well, I went to set the drawers and realized that I took a bad measurement. The drawer slides should be 1 inch subtracted from the total width of the interior, and I did something more. I used my Bloom calipers on it. They're plastic, so that's probably the issue, but as you can see, yeah, I've got a nice little gap between there. So what I'm doing is I went to Home Depot, got some of this hardboard, cut a bunch of little thin strips, and I'm mounting them to the side of the drawer, and it seems to work. So no harm, no foul. I don't think it looks too terribly bad. Just sticking out just a little bit, but they work. So anyway, onward and upward. To install the drawers, I used a piece of 1/2 inch plywood as a spacer between the drawers, popped a couple of screws into the front of the slides, and then pulled the drawer out to finish screwing the slide onto the drawer box. And here you can see that I used some double-sided tape to adhere the 1/8 inch hardboard strips to the box, and then attach the drawer slides over top. After installing the drawers, I went on to making a countertop for the left-hand side of the miter station. I used 2 layers of 3/4 inch ultralight MDF. Funny part was there was nothing light about this material. I chose MDF for the substrate as it provides a smooth surface for applying the laminate with minimal telegraphing. And it also has the same expansion and contraction ratio as laminate, so they will grow and shrink together with changes in relative humidity. And this significantly reduces the chance for any delamination. So I rolled out some glue to adhere the 2 sheets together. Next, I carried in my top layer and dropped it into place, and it was one lucky drop. I only had to make minimal adjustments to flush up the ends in the front. I then applied a bunch of clamps along the perimeter of the top to make sure I got a good bond between the sheets. I also pre-drilled some holes with a countersink bit and put in screws which acted as clamps while the glue dried. After a couple of hours, I took the top outside to cut it to the final dimension, preparing it for some hardwood edge banding.
Okay, now that I've squared the board up, cleaned all the edges, it's ready for my hardwood edge banding. Removed all the screws. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and measure and cut for the edge band. That ain't gonna work. Now is it? All right, I'm gonna have to eat my own words. I'm gonna have to take the chance that these holes do not telegraph. Dang it. It's not the first thing that's happened bad here. All right. Okay, so I made my first cut and got that nice and tight in there, so I'm right on. Went ahead and clamped that up, brought it down to the other side, got this clamped, and so I will be looking to make that cut right there.
So I applied an ample amount of glue to the hardwood edge band, clamped it in place, and shot some 18 gauge pin nails in it to hold it in place while the glue dried. I set the hardwood proud of the surface of the top so I could come back later with a router and flush it to the surface. Then I gave it a quick sanding to make sure everything was smooth. It was finally time to apply the laminate. I had purchased the laminate a few days ago to give it time to acclimate to the temperature and humidity level of the substrate in my shop. Most laminate manufacturers recommend anywhere from 2 to 3 days for acclimation. This ensures that you don't get too much movement in your product after it's been applied. I tried this score and snap method, but wasn't too fond of it, as you can create some pretty sharp edges on the laminate. So to cut this down to size, I used a router. I left about an inch overhang on the opposite side of the top and used a flush trim bit with a bearing to cut it down. I used contact adhesive to glue the laminate to the MDF. After making sure the laminate was free of any dust, I applied 100% coverage using a short nap roller and worked pretty quickly as it was a warm night outside and I didn't want it to clot up. I used a solvent-based contact, and the solvents tend to flash off pretty quickly when it's warm weather. And it's pretty interesting that the laminate will actually feel cold to the touch as the solvents flash off. Some kind of chemical reaction, I guess. And the reason that I put on the blue tape is so after I'm done with spreading the glue, I can take this off. I can take it off. There we go. And minimal glue in the rim so we can put the lid back on and use the rest of the glue another day. So there you have it. A tip I actually know. I applied the glue to the MDF as well and waited about 20 minutes for the glue to dry. Once it was dry, I placed dowels across the surface of the MDF to keep the laminate from sticking until I lined it up with overhang on all sides. Once in position, I removed the center dowel and worked my way to the ends, making sure that I didn't have any air bubbles. Then I used a J roller to apply pressure across the top, making sure I had good adhesion. I first trimmed the laminate with a flush trim bit, and then I came back with a chamfer bit. Unfortunately, my camera died, so I didn't capture it on video. The next morning, I got to work cutting, edge banding, and filing all of my drawer fronts. Then, to accommodate the drawer pulls, I had to build a jig to route out a small recess so the pulls would fit flush to the back of the drawer fronts. Then I used some compact laminate samples as spacers to create a uniform gap between the drawer fronts, clamped the fronts, and secured with screws.
So good thing I've got these little spacers from work. This is like a compact material, and so anyway, it helps me keep everything nice and even across the front here. And then I think I only need one of these for this drawer front on the side. Oh yeah. Looks good. I'm going to flush on the side here, which is good. Go ahead and pop a couple screws in. We'll call this drawer done.
After I finished installing the drawer fronts for the base cabinets, I moved on to cutting the parts for the next level of the build, which would include drawers on the left of the miter saw and an open cabinet to the right. The process for the next level of cabinets was basically the same as the base cabinets, however this time I installed my drawer slides to the cabinets prior to assembly. This made it much easier to install the hardware and keep everything square. So then it was rinse and repeat for the rest of the drawer slides. Then after I assembled the next tier of cabinets, I set them in place and screwed them together. I built the drawers the same as the base cabinets, except this time I didn't edge band the top of the drawer sides. I think I was getting burnt out on all the ironing. Before I could set the last mid-tier cabinet to the right of the miter saw, I had to build the countertop. This time I used the track saw to cut the laminate, which was much easier. I didn't have enough MDF left, so I made this top with plywood. And again, making sure there was no dust or dirt on the surface of the laminate and substrate, I rolled on the contact adhesive to both the back of the laminate and the countertop. Using the dowels once again helped me position the laminate before sticking it to the counter. Once the laminate was down, I used the J-roller to make sure I had good adhesion. Just be careful applying pressure around the edges as you don't want to crack the laminate. Okay, so I've got the side and then I've got the front that I'm going to chamfer to match up to my other countertop. However, my plate did not fit my chamfer bit. It was going to catch, and so I just took a piece of extra phenolic that I had sitting around and just cut it to work with this particular router. So let's go ahead and wrap that off. Okay, that's giving us a nice chamfer all the way across, and it's taking the edge off the laminate, which is good. Got some residual glue I gotta get cleaned off here. But anyway, on the back side and the part that's gonna go butt up against the wall, I'm gonna go ahead and take my mill file and I'm gonna knock that down. I like to take the file, use it upside down and pull down at about a 45-degree angle, and that takes that sharp laminate edge off. And then I'm just going to barely touch the edge here. I don't think I need to touch it much. If there's any edge left on here, come off. Barely touching it. There we go. Now I just got to get it cleaned up and get the top level with the other side of our miter saw. Next, I cut all my parts for the top tier of the cabinets. It was back to edge banding, so I edge banded and I filed all the front edges. Once all the pieces were complete, I assembled the cabinets on the shop floor, and I'm really hoping this is the last time for a ground assembly. Of course, the garage floor was not flat or level, so I had to make sure that the front edges were flush when I nailed it. After hoisting the top cabinets up and screwing them to the second tier, I realized I forgot to put in stringers, so I went back later and added them using pocket holes. Then it was back to edge banding for the drawer fronts and figuring out how to cut the laminate so the patterns lined up both vertically and horizontally. This took a pretty long time as I had to be very exact with my cuts. Okay, so what I did just now is I had laid out all my drawer fronts on the front side to make sure that I had a consistent pattern, and then I just got done transferring all of those lines to the back of the sheet, so when I get my contact adhesive on, I'll be able to put the laminate down and then reference and index the board to my pencil lines. So it's not going to be easy, but hopefully we'll get some consistent patterns. So let's try it out. Well, all was going well until I got to my last drawer front, and then disaster struck when the laminate stuck before I intended, so I had to rip it off and recut another piece of laminate. The next morning I trimmed all the drawer fronts and the back panel for the open cabinet. Once again, I used my homemade jig to route a shallow recess on the back of the drawer fronts to accommodate the drawer pulls. I measured to find the center of the drawer fronts and lined up the jig, clamped, and then routed. This time for the mounting of the drawer fronts, because the depth of the drawers was so small, I had to shoot some pin nails in and then remove the drawers to put some screws in to secure the fronts. This actually went much faster than the base cabinets, as it was at a much easier height to work. Then I had to finish the last bit of edge banding for the doors for the top cabinets.
Okay, so I got tired of routing and getting my router bit all gummed up with this adhesive on the back of here. Got tired of trying to take it off with the file. So I brought one of these nice little Veritex doodads. So anyway, let's give it a shot and see how it works. Wow. What a difference. So then I can come back and hit it with my file. Much easier.
To mount the hinges, I purchased a jig which allowed me to accurately drill the 35mm hole for the hinge cup and the two mounting screws. I didn't realize until I was on my last set of doors that I didn't have to remove the drill bit each and every time to drill for the mounting screw holes. I guess it pays to read the directions sometimes. But what fun would that be?
Hinge number one.
Then it was rinse and repeat for the rest of the doors.
Okay, so what I did here was I marked this line at 37mm back from the front, which is standard for European hinges. Measured down from 3.5. held the door up like this, all the way against it, got my center line, and then just transferred that over with there. So now I'm gonna attempt with my shakiness to see if I can get this on my first shot here. Okay, I'll take it. I will take it. Let's see if I can get one in the bottom here. All right, let's take a step back. Let's see if we can see if it's gonna work. Maybe. Hey, there we go. Let's see if we're flush up top. Ooh, I'd say that's pretty doggone good. A little off, I have to adjust it. But my reveal is pretty consistent on the side here. So hey, we'll take it. We will take it. Soft close, I love it.
At this point, I was getting pretty excited to see this project come together.
Okay, I had to make a couple adjustments. I had to slide these base plates up a little bit, but after all is said and done, came out sweet. So it's flush with the top. My opening there is equidistant to that opening there. So, all right, 2 more sets of hinges, 2 more sets of doors, I should say. And I'm gonna call this complete for now.
I hope you enjoyed this build as much as I did. Be sure to subscribe as I continue with this project by adding a charging station for my drills and adding a fence with stop blocks. Until next time.